Yes, and I look forward to the course. So happy Wednesday.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Mhm. 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 All right, just gonna wait another couple minutes, 2 minutes, and then we will just jump right in. So thank you for being patient. It is the middle of April. Do you believe it? I feel like it was just March.
Right.
It's already halfway done with April. Wow.
And it's gonna snow on Friday.
I know. I know. Oh well. I remember a few years ago we had quite a lot of snow in April.
Well, I was looking
I
for
remember.
a warm winter break.
I
so
know. Nope. So sorry.
I got hold on.
Womp womp. All right, well, one, thank you for jumping back on. And if you're new tonight, welcome. There's some information in the chat from Mr. C about, please remember to put your email address and how you would like your name printed for your certificate in the chat. So I know some of you did that last week. We don't want to miss anyone. So thank you. Okay. Well, as I said, welcome back. It is a Wednesday and we've made it this far. So thank you all for returning and joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about coping skills in an introductory format. And then I'm hoping, Krista and I, that it sparks some conversation and also some insight to your own journey with your own coping skills, which we'll talk about. But first, I just want to recap a little bit of what we did last week. Last week, we covered the emotions of fear and anger. And I don't know about you, but, you know, with the current state of our country, and I feel like everywhere I look on the news, I just get angrier and angrier, particularly in regard to violence in the Black and brown communities and, you know, what's going on in Minneapolis right now and losing more Black men to police violence. It just makes me angry. So, you know, I think recognizing emotion is super important. It's part of why we're doing this workshop. So it's interesting that we covered it last week and encapsulate strong emotions, both fear and anger. And that finding the word intentions, young people about how they're feeling about it. So I just want to recognize with this group, you know, as Krista and I are facilitators for you, you know, to hold space for that. So we recognize that and understand that. And last week, talking specifically about how we manage our anger and our fear and where it manifests from as our own individual people and why it's important to understand that when we think about being mindful. It's truly, truly critical to have a relationship, which sounds strange, with your stress emotions, because like any good relationship, you have to work at it, right? Am I right? So I think that understanding your own stress emotions help you have a better relationship with stress, which segues into this week's topic of coping. So coping is a term that's pretty broad. And I think that it has a continuum, right? So how we cope as individuals starts when we're very young. So, Krista talks a lot about early childhood development and the process of how the different stages of development as children impact us as adults. Critically important for coping because we learn as infants how to problem solve, right? What's the first thing, infants do? They cry when they want something because that's all they can do. They work with what they got. So, that's how they communicate. As we grow as young people, children, young human beings, you start to formulate, familial bonds and understand like you can get this if this happens, and understanding emotion and reading people, critical empathy skill. So coping is kind of this like big, lots of different tools, and it's not one size fits all. So I just want to be really clear about that. I wouldn't advocate for one particular coping skill over another. It's whatever you feel. A few things. What is realistic for you? And that means basically what you can actually do. Because a lot of times we operate through life in a default setting where, oh, I need to do this. And you're constantly setting goals and then feeling disappointed when you can't reach them. So when you're thinking about your coping skills and how you cope, it's both important to understand positive coping skill. Some people cope, for example, that's part of personality is like, I'm going to not talk about it, and then maybe it will go away, or substance use. But coping coincides with resilience. And it is, I love this quote. Krista found this, and I just think it's brilliant. And I'm obsessed with the ocean, so I love the picture. Resilience isn't a single skill, but it's a variety of skills. It's kind of your own toolkit. We keep using those words as we've kind of moved through our last few weeks, and different coping mechanisms, rather, that you can use to bounce back on when there's things that happen in your life that cause adversity, bumps in the road, obstacles, etc. Focusing on how you can kind of amplify or emphasize the positive. So it's interesting. Even in chaos, there's opportunity, right? I think that is an interesting thing to consider. So when we kind of work through some of the different, coping skills that we're going to talk about, I want you to just think about that and how that manifests for you. So just as a reminder, make sure you have your piece of paper and things to write on, take notes. We're going to ask you some questions and do some interactive journaling. So again, thanks for showing up this week. All right, what's next, Chris?
All right, so the first coping strategy is information seeking. This is a common coping technique. A person is searching for information from different venues to increase their awareness about a situation that has become a threat, right? So in the past, we talked about the fear of the unknown and how it causes stress. Some people will avoid, and others will seek out the information so that they can get a better grasp of the situation. So there's some pros to this. This is a proactive stance. It can be empowering for some. So making the unknown known kind of lessens the fear. Kind of the idea that knowledge is power, and you have to process that information to become more knowledgeable, right? But then there are some cons to this coping strategy as well. So not all information is good information. Too much information is not always great. So really recognizing the source of your information. So now that, you know, in technology, we have Google, and I am guilty of this. I Google everything. But, you know, a lot of those sources are not fact-based. So I think
Mhm.
with information seeking, just being kind of
Mhm.
mindful of where are you getting that information.
Right.
from.
You know what's a great real world example for this right now is the COVID vaccine.
Right.
It's a perfect example for what you're talking about, and that you have to have buy-in, right? And information seeking, do your research about the vaccine, you know, your own personal view on it. But there's also a bunch of stuff out there. It's just not factual. So that's exactly to your point. Like, I think that you have to, you know, understand where information comes from to use it to your benefit. But there are different factions, like where people use it for their own agendas, as Chris is saying. So I think that's huge.
Right.
You see that all the time. Mhm. Well, they say, you ever hear that? Like, people talk about, they say, who's the they?
Yeah.
I'd like to know who the they is. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that's a good one. I do that a lot. I think I'm an information seeker. I like to know everything. I like to, so I can make an informed choice.
Right. Me too.
And I think that's also part of a mindfulness spectrum, right? Another coping technique that is pretty big, and I think, again, we keep saying all the time that human beings are social creatures. This is called social orchestration. So there's two different layers to this. I want you to think about this. It's a coping technique that happens where you either change the stress producing factors in your environment. So, for example, if you have a really stressful job, your job is causing all sorts of health issues, you know, and also, you know, it's not, you're not feeling valued, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can do a few things about that. One, again, if you don't have the opportunity to try to change it, then it's the second part of this concept. But what people would normally do is try to change their circumstance. Or you change the environment, which is the path of least resistance. So what that means is you're in the work environment, you know, you know, your job is a toxic environment, you don't like your boss, but you need a job and you have to make money to support your family. So you really don't have the luxury of, you know, trying to look for something else and switching jobs, and it's not convenient. So what would be the path of least resistance in regard to social orchestration is to kind of really have strong boundaries when you're at work. And we make these decisions all the time throughout the day, even as something as simple as the route that you drive.
Right.
I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, let me go this way. Or I'm going to go this way because it's just a feeling, and then it's the longer way. But, you know, you may have more traffic lights, but you feel safer in that way. So it seems like a silly example, but social orchestration happens constantly throughout our day. How we interact with people, decisions we make, and what's realistic. I keep saying that because I think it's really important to understand when you're trying to garner coping skills, you have to do what's realistic. You take Kristen and I, for example, we are, so we're going to grab coping skills to help us manage our stress in our lives to become more mindful. So that's another part of it as well. Oh, there's a comment in the chat. I had a friend who commuted 1 hour each way, but hated her manager. I asked why. Ultimately, she was let go. Created a bad attitude and foster a hostile environment. Yep. Yeah. Work stress is a lot. We spend 85% of our time outside of the home working. You know, if you are working outside of the home, not including if you work in the home, right? So it's a lot. Here's another coping technique, which I think, again, human beings are symbiotic creatures. Having a strong social support group is critical to help you manage strife, stress, anything that comes through in your life. I can use a personal example is my family. My family is large, mostly on my husband's side, and we are very close and lean on each other often for lots of different things, support in raising children, support in emotional support in, information seeking. So I'm fortunate enough to have a strong social support that is also my family. So I think this is you can insert your social group here. We also have that with friends, right? And other people, coworkers. You can have a great environment at work. And it's basically when you nurture your relationships along the way. And it helps to kind of counter the negative sides of stress. So here's the con, and Krista talked about the pros and cons for each one. The con here would be working with people in your social support group who may be maladaptive in nature. So people who don't respect your boundaries, people who don't respect you, people who should you to death, like, oh, you should do this. Why don't you do this? If only you did this. So this becomes a negative aspect to your social group and creates a whole other level of stress for you. So it's something to consider to have balance. So oftentimes we have pockets of people, right? You have like this group over here, coworkers, you have your friends, more collegial, you go out maybe together and socialize when you're able, and then you have family, and sometimes it melds all together. But social support is scientifically proven to help increase levels of serotonin and oxytocin, which we talked about last week, oxytocin as the feel-good hormone. You feel happy when you have strong social support. What's next? I forget which slides are next.
Kind of went over this.
Oh, and this is just emphasizes the point. I love playing tennis. Does anyone play tennis? I'm terrible at it because I always loft the ball over the off the thing, but I try to pretend. So there's more and more evidence that points to the idea that if you have a strong social support system from friends, it kind of it's counterintuitive to stress effects. And also having people in your life that you trust. You want to have people you can trust that know you. Everyone has those people. It's either one or two people. It's not a lot of people. And that's on purpose and by design. And
Right.
It should be that way.
Constantly talk about like having your tribe, those people that you know and know you and are going to be supportive, of you and not, kind of working against you.
Right. And you can feel safe with. So you can say, like, I have those people in my life, you know who you are. I shocking or upsetting or, it's just support. People tell you about yourself, those people that are closest to you, and you want that, you want people to support you. That's the biggest thing.
Right. I hope this isn't your hobby.
Ooh, hobbies and outside interests. I don't know about taking pictures of glaciers, but I think for particularly if you have a flair to write, I write fictional pieces, poetry, all sorts of stuff. So I find that so we enjoy, little things, all things nerdy about writing. And then other hobbies. I'm a huge gardener. My husband and I have bonded over the years over gardening, which has been really cool because who knew? And it's just fun. We enjoy it and we spend time together doing it, and it's fun. So why is this a coping strategy? Because it enables you to put your energy into something else. So here's a critical thing. People who suffer from depressive disorders So this would be a clinical piece to take away. May not necessarily be engaging in hobbies or outside interests. That's usually a flag that someone may be struggling with depression or anxiety because they don't want to do anything, can't, because they're lacking of the interest because of the depressive episode or disorder. So usually in those circumstances, Krista and I talk about recommendations and referrals. We're huge advocates for seeking out mental health providers to help guide through anything that would indicate depressive episode and recognizing that those things happen. So I think it's a nice gauge, and why I bring it up with hobbies and interests, because you can gauge in your life kind of the ups and downs for you. And it's usually a key flag to the people around you that something else may be going on. It's important as a coping mechanism because you're able to put your energy into something that you enjoy. Conversely, you can have hobbies and outside interests that are not healthy for you. So spending a lot of money. Some people would say that that's a hobby. I love to shop, so yeah, retail therapy, right? Which has a whole other level of stress related to it when the bill comes, or you run out of money that was for something else, or substance engaging, heavy substance use, and then feeling the effects of that the next, or, things that may be affected by your substance use that you're not aware of, relationships, your job, things of that nature. So it's important to consider those factors when we talk and interests. Where the chat, I'd love to hear or see it. We'll go to the next slide, but right? And when we're sitting constantly, it's good to move around. And then you connect with nature and you see things that you haven't seen. Never been fishing, but it's a bucket list item. Okay, noted. Fish on. Fishing's great. I want to fly fish. There's a whole technique to that. Yeah. So lots of different hobbies. Love to see it. Love to hear it. Thank you for sharing that. Let me see. We lost the slides, so I'm going to improvise. All right. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about something that it is definitely a coping mechanism that I don't know if you've ever considered it, but it's the concept of forgiveness. This is a big one. It's a big one because, like a lot of different things that we've talked about, there's a continuum where people fall when it comes to forgiveness. And I'm sure you've heard the comment, to forgive is divine. Why do you think that comment exists? Because forgiveness plays on the ego and the soul at the same time. And sometimes, and I can go, for whatever reason why people feel they need to forgive or not forgive is their own personal experience. But why it's in here is largely because when we think about mindfulness and our own stress in our lives, oftentimes clinically what we see as providers is people who seek out comfort and have anxiety because of guilt, because of regret, because of specific experiences. And I think the concept of forgiveness requires a lot of strength, because it's easier for your brain to hold on to the whys. And again, it's your journey, it's your personal journey. And this isn't a judgment. We always talk about safe spaces and being able to talk about things. Everyone has their own journey. Ms. Ivy put in, forgiveness gives you peace of mind. It certainly does, and clarity of thought. Forgiveness is for the forgiver, not the, I missed that quote. Here's Krista. Not the forgiven. Exactly. And it takes a lot. And I'm sure, you've seen a lot of different things in regards to this. But again, looking at last week, we talked about stress emotion and anger. So where it sits in the brain is the anger house. So Chris is going to talk a little bit about forgiveness. Chris, are you back on? Yeah, there you are.
Yeah.
Hello. Technical difficulties.
Right. So forgiveness, I know you went over a lot of it, but it's often seen as it's a burden, right? It's not something that's easy. It's very difficult. So as she said, it's coping with the unresolved anger issues where you feel wronged or somebody did something to you and now you're unable to move forward with your life. It's often seen as a sign of weakness, but it's actually essential to stress recovery and to stress prevention.
Excellent.
Right. Some of the keys to forgiveness is empathy, being able to shift your perspective and seeing it from other people's point of view, and being able to manage your emotions. I mean, it's often stated you can't control others. You can only control yourself and then your reactions to others. So those are some of, the key components to being able to forgive.
It's interesting that you talk about empathy. I think empathy it's a critical crisis right now. The lack of empathy that people have, it makes me sad because I think empathy enables us to understand others. And, notwithstanding other facets to that, because I think there's a lot that goes behind this concept of, bias and things of that nature. But having empathy is really a critical skill that kind of coincides with forgiveness. And I also think that forgiveness is, it's a termed thing, right, Krista? Like it's on your own terms and everyone is in a different place with it. So it's really damaging to hold on to stuff, fill in the blank, right? And it literally changes your brain chemicals when you have toxicity of emotion. Kind of much like grief changes the neurochemicals in your brain. It's the same concept. Anger does the same thing with the brain and how we function.
Right. But forgiveness kind of acts like a buffer to certain things. You don't feel certain emotions because you're better able to manage those emotions. So you're not as quick to anger because you're able to take the other person's perspective in the situation.
It's interesting working with young adults in a college setting. I work a lot with what we would consider like the parental wound. And these are young adults. So you have, 18 to 24-year-olds. And there's a lot of, family issues, dysfunction, etc. And I always tell my students, your parents are people. They're not perfect. And some have limitations or had limitations. And you have to understand what those are as an adult and come to terms with it on your own terms, and I think just as an example, some people can carry that stuff for years and years and years and it just festers, like
Right.
the scab you keep picking. So
I agree. I always say, parenting doesn't come with a manual. I know my mom says it all the time. And, when you're a parent, you see the same thing too. So for me, it's easy to, forgive anything that I thought, didn't maybe go the way I wanted it to go or should have gone, because when you're a parent and just even being a teacher, you see Parents are doing the best that they can with the circumstances that they are given. And, they have to make choices. And it might not be the choice that you think is best, but they're making choices based on their situation and what's best for their kids. And that's kind of, what you have to go with is they're doing the best they can. Parents want the best for their kids, and then, move forward.
Yeah, that's super powerful. That's empathy, what you're talking about there, Krista. Perfect. All right, here's a comment in the chat. Being forgetful helps. Like forgive and forget. Out of sight, out of mind. But that could also be avoidance. You want to be careful. So maybe the thing wasn't that important to begin with. So that's a huge statement, I think. Because sometimes we put value in a lot of things and then realize, you ever look back and you're like, oh, why? Why did that matter so much? So I think it's having an awareness. Cannot understand the concept of end of life being unknown and folks willing to cut when they could have made a difference. That's true. Life is very fragile, right?
So this is just, a little questionnaire that you can think to yourself. How forgiving are you? So answering the following statements according to whether they are true or false. When someone upsets me, I tend to keep as much distance as possible for their safety.
Ooh, this is so specific.
Right.
Either true or false. There's no sometimes or maybe. It depends.
Right.
Okay, I got you on that one. All right, next.
When someone hurts me, I want to see them pay. When an otherwise reliable person lets me down, I am unlikely to forgive them quickly.
Wait, let me read that one more time. When an otherwise reliable person lets me down. Okay.
I've held a grudge against someone for more than a year.
Have I? Chris is like, I don't know. I'm gonna say no on that one. I don't think I have. The first one though, I put true to that, and I'll tell you why. There's not a lot. I think I am pretty tempered most of the time. When I'm really upset, even like my family knows, they're just like, oh, I'm gonna stay away from her. So I think the distance is helpful. You ever have, it's like the relationships. You have relationships where people are like, you want to talk about it? Let's talk. I want to talk. I want to talk. And like push.
Yeah.
And then you end up like exploding because there needs to be a compromise there. So I always think it's helpful in relationships to say, I really want to talk about this right now, but not now. Let's talk about it at another time when I'm a little calmer, because you have, what is it? The phrase cooler heads prevail. It's true.
I also think it can be situational too.
Yeah, for sure.
As well, depending on where.
I don't have a problem with emotion. Like I say this all the time. Me and my husband talk about this. It's like, if you're going to rage out or cry, like get it out.
Right.
Particularly if you feel safe to do it in certain company, right? But I think it's important to get that out too, right? The second one, I mean, that's a tough one.
And I think
that's personal.
That depends too on what exactly happened in the situation,
Right. That scenario there is Hollywood, right? Like that sells stories and
yes.
Yep. But some people, that's the mantra, right?
Right. An eye for an eye.
Yeah. An otherwise reliable person lets me down. I'm road rage. We keep talking about road rage, Miss Joy. Let's process that. It's so interesting now. I never thought I would be yelling at cars and because I'm the same way. That's why I think it's funny. I never thought I would do that. And my kids are like, Mom, you're yelling at the cars again. I'm like, great, dang it.
Right. So the more statements you answered as true, the less naturally forgiveness comes to you.
What if you're split?
You still have a ways to go. I don't know.
Interesting. For this is a tough one. It really is a divine concept. I remember my late father used to tell me all the time, if you have the ability to forgive in your life, you've arrived.
Right.
Because it's huge. Empathy. Okay, that was a good one, Krista. All right. More coping skills. Prayer and faith. Huge, huge coping technique. In whatever way it manifests to you in the concept of prayer and faith. So whoever you pray to and whatever your faith base is coincides with this as a coping strategy. I find most people, and it's interesting because, I keep going to college students because that's what I know. So I'm sorry if I'm boring you with my stats on college students, but there's a concept called religiosity. And the studies that have been done on college students is interesting because you would think, and this is a generalization, like some people think, oh, college students, young adults, they have no connection to God or a higher being. That is false. About 88% of young college age students have some sort of faith base to help them cope with adverse things in their lives. Whatever how they identify either having a faith, like a foundational cornerstone religion, or spirituality. That's a big percentage. 88%, it's big. So it's really powerful thing to consider when you're working on concepts of coping and mindfulness and what this means to you. I, believe in intentional prayer. I also believe communing with nature is like a religion to me. I love being outside. I love being close to nature and the elements. Someone put that in the chat earlier. They like to walk. I totally concur with that because it's grounding for me. It keeps me grounded.
Right. For me, I like water. Water is like a calmness.
Same.
I like to be in the water.
Yeah. Someone else mentioned the beach too. And I think that is huge. And everything comes back to water. So that's beautiful. I agree. I even love rainy days, which seems strange, but I do. So prayer and faith, really, really big. And we want to, there's a few slides in here about it because I think it's a cornerstone to how we cope. And sometimes people reach for different types of prayers. So, prayers are intentional. It's energy that you put out there. So you either, pray for gratitude, forgiveness, and intercessory prayers are spoken into, from text. So either if you adhere to a Bible or any type of other, book based on your religious faith, what does that mean for you? Scripture, readings, books, proverbs, etc. So there's lots of different types of prayer. Some people have intentional prayer when they wake and when they go to bed at night. It's a lovely way to start and end your day. Again, with intention, setting an intention. What's next? Faith is a big one for a coping strategy, and it's really an important value. So some people look at faith as a family value, a personal value, and what does it mean to you to have faith? Faith can mean a lot of different things. So when someone says, keep the faith, have faith, believe and have faith, it could be of different sets. It could be from a religious concept, or it could be from a spiritual concept, or it could be just a state of mind. It's an attitude that you adopt to cope with stress. So for example, if you're going through adversity at this time, holding on to faith keeps your brain centered on something that you can turn into a positive or look forward to. So it keeps you at an optimal space. If you're in despair, you're kind of here. If you're holding on to faith, it kind of keeps you either level, and then what comes above holding on to faith is having hope. So that kind of raises you up a little bit, even higher than that. But most of the time, your faith is connected to something bigger than yourself.
Right. I was going to say, I think it's a trust in a higher power or a spiritual being to answer those prayers. And you're trusting that some way, somehow, this spiritual being or God is going to relieve you, make in time, and in their way. But it really is dependent on that person's level of faith.
And I also think it's something people can lose. Right. Which can be sad. Is this claiming and affirming? Kind of, I would say so. If Christian Jesus said what he has done, we can do and more if you believe even a mustard seed. Yeah, so that it falls in line with faith. And I think a faith journey is also very intimate and very personal. And when people lose it, it can be disparaging. And there's a core reason why, which kind of circles back to some of the things that Krista was talking about with forgiveness. So how do you hold on to your faith and not lose it? And what would it take for it to be at risk? Are things to think about, for sure. Great. So prayer is exactly a meditation, right? When you think about it, you're setting an intention, like a meditation. You're thinking about where it's going and who it's intended for, inward, outward, and they're very parallel in nature, and repetitive. So the more consistent you are with prayer and meditation, the more outcomes you may see as positive. So meditation is challenging. Sometimes it's difficult to sit for 5 minutes and meditate. And some people have stigmas about meditation. They think you got to sit there and chant or do some mantras or go into this tantric state. That's not necessarily true. Whatever works for you. And when I think about prayer and meditation, like if you say the rosary, for example, that's repetitive because each bead is a different verse of prayer and it's repetitive. So it becomes meditative in nature. I'd also say, because Krista and I like to balance, there is an interesting, and I would say negative side effect to meditation. It can happen that it re-triggers trauma response, which we'll get into next week. We're going to talk a little bit about trauma and stress, but some meditative states, and this is where you got to be careful with wellness experts, and I put that in air quotes because it's an industry that is quite damaging if you are vulnerable. And people aren't equipped to handle triggers and traumas in people and can reactivate things that are very damaging. So I implore you, when seeking out information, again, the top of the talk, we talked about information seeking as a coping strategy. Make sure the people you align yourself with and trust in both aspects are, know what they're talking about and have value in either communities as leaders of their faith or religion, and or in the wellness industry. Look for certifications that are accredited. That is a whole other talk, right? But you have to ask for that information because you have a right to know the practitioners that you work with, what they have. So I'll say that much. I love this picture too. I want to be this guy. just sitting on the rock. Looks beautiful. I don't know how long I can sit like that though. In terms of, kind of the pedagogy of prayer, and that means kind of the contextual steps, the ways to pray, and there's no specific way to pray. So let me just say that much. It's whatever works for you, but there's usually the three contexts of what it consists of. So having a clear intention, or the first bullet here is a clear transmission of thought. So you know precisely what you're praying for or meditating on. Expression is present tense. So how it's impacting you, praying for this. So if someone's ill, or you're praying for someone's health, or just their mental state, or someone's child, present tense. And then expression of a positive context, right? You want to put energy out there to people who receive it in a positive way. So making sure that, prayers for safe travel, or prayers for someone's getting surgery, right? Like you want to have a positive context, guide the hands of the surgeons, things of that nature, right? If that makes sense. So that's just kind of the academic aspects of praying, which I bet you didn't think exists, but it does. So just to kind of wrap up, there's more steps here. The emotional vibration of how we pray can be powerful. People cry, even when people meditate, emotions come up. And I think it's kind of letting them come in, honoring the space in which they come in, feeling what you're feeling, and then letting it pass through is really critical. Number 5 is interesting because I bet you're like, what does that mean? Maintaining a detached outcome. There's no causation for prayer. So what that means is if you set an intention and then it doesn't work out the way you intended, there's no blame or someone coming back to you to say, well, you prayed for me and that didn't work, So that's what that means, is to have a detached outcome. Again, what do you think that coincides with? Having faith. Faith is 50-50, right? When you think about it, go one way or another. And then an expression of attitude and gratitude, feeling blessed, feeling privileged to have an opportunity. Like I feel that way every Wednesday at 7, that I'm able to come into your homes to have this conversation with you. I feel and express my gratitude. Again, when we do that, we're communal. It releases those feel-good hormones in our brain and helps us cope better. So why did there's so much emphasis on prayer? Because it's important to people and it helps in managing adverse situations. Think about the news. When you turn on the news and there's something that happens to a family, like there's groups of people like gathering, praying, communal, setting intention, talking about outcomes, having faith, like all of those things are there. So you have to think about how that manifests into your own life, into your own relationships, and how that will work for you as a coping technique. All right. There's a comment in the chat. I prayed, claimed, affirmed, and still lost my uncles. Yep. My foundation took a hit on these and others, not the outcomes you wanted. So that's a powerful statement. Ms. Joy, thank you for putting that in there. And I think it speaks to, we don't want to be saccharine about faith. And what that means is if you are eternally optimistic, it's just as damaged. Toxic positivity. Krista talked about that a few weeks ago. It's just as damaging as having a loss of faith. So I think having an expectation that if you do this, this will happen can be difficult. It's hard. That is a difficult pill to swallow. And she says it was me being selfish. Okay, well, I wouldn't be so hard on yourself. Give yourself space and grace. I think that's a normal humanistic response, but it's how we manifest stress and adversity in our lives. For example, I'm trying to teach my children that life isn't a straight line and that bad things are going to happen to them. And when bad things happen to them, how you problem solve and manage it will make or break you as an adult. And I think those are important conversations to have. How I manifest that in conversations with my children is largely around grief and loss at this present time in our lives. But it's important because it honors the feelings and it enables them to work through it so they can function, still have kind of an equal balance of experiencing the pain, but not understanding the loss. So I think that's largely critical and important for everybody. And it's your journey. It's on your terms. And that's a difficult thing because we are a lot of times acculturated within our families and the people around us of how we manage expectations in life. And I think that it comes with a lot of change and willingness to understand and faith, right? That you could do everything right. And think of it this way. Krista and I talk about this all the time. Education, okay? You go to school, you get a degree, you get a job. The American dream is not for everybody. And that's not how it works. And sometimes you go to school, you get a job, you pay your dues, but you lose your job. And then what? I did everything right. I did what I was supposed to do. You know, what does that translate for you working through coping with adversity and strife? I think it's difficult. And I think we have to learn when those things happen, because they will happen, how you manage it. It's like a pathway, right? You take this road or that road. And then think about all the things we talked about, coping mechanisms, having a strong support system, leaning on people, being able to talk openly in a safe environment with others. That's so critical to be able to share your feelings without judgment and without shoulding. That's a huge, huge thing. There's a couple more comments in the chat. Pray for guidance and the mental strength to cope. Yes. Yes. I pray for mental strength every day. I love that. Pray to handle success in a positive manner and with dignity. Mm-hmm. Having integrity, right?
I also think, it's about, finding the silver lining in the dark situations and realizing that it's okay not to be okay.
Yes, I love that. Yeah.
Right. And doing what we're doing now is focusing on our mindset and knowing that life happens, whether or not you're prepared for it. And try to keep your faith and stay the course, and things will get better. So just using those coping skills.
It's sometimes not always the outcome that we want, but it's the outcomes that we get, right? So it's having resilience,
exactly,
to be able to move forward. So just some prompts to kind of wrap up what we're talking about. And I want to introduce kind of a personal mindfulness plan going into the next couple of weeks. Just consider the ways in which you cope. I know a lot of us have thrown in ideas in the chat, and I'm very grateful for those of you who shared. It's wonderful. But do you find the time to do these activities? And if you don't, what are the barriers there? Like, think about that for yourself. I talked a lot in the beginning about the self-care movement, right? Self-care movement is now, I think, Krista and I talk about this all the time, it's becoming a space of shame for people. Because if you're not doing this when it comes to self-care, you're doing it wrong. And I think that's crazy. Or I shouldn't say crazy. I think that's absurd to have that mindset, because it's whatever translates for you in terms of self-care. And if you do engage in certain hobbies or interests or activities to help you cope, do you notice a change once you've done it? Like, how do you feel? Like, I know how I feel after I'm out in nature and walking. It's just, you feel lighter, you feel clearer. I feel more grounded, and I'm able to connect more with people around me, my family. It's just helpful. So those are just things to consider, and please feel free to put it in the chat. I do want to be mindful of the time. I also want to talk a little bit about the concept of a personal mindfulness plan. So the last week of this series, And I'm going to talk about, we'll talk about this a little next week. We want you to start thinking about what a personal mindfulness plan is to you. So these are takeaways for your toolkit. So think about this. The 3 most important critical aspects to having a personal mindfulness plan is it has to have meaning to you. You have to have buy-in. If you don't have meaning and buy-in, it won't work. Okay. What's the purpose? What is it gaining to your life, or what is it taking away off your plate? And then what's the value? This is huge. Our time is valuable. So when you're putting time into something to manage your behavioral change, to improve yourself as a human, it has to be a value, and it just circles back to your meaning. So consider those 3 things as we kind of move into the last couple weeks. And I really want you to think about that for kind of homework. I put that in air quotes. But think about some of the coping techniques that we talked about. Would those fit into your plan? What's the meaning? Like, for example, for me, a personal mindfulness plan is to continue to act with empathy towards others, listen to understand, because of the work I do and, you know, how I like to move through community spaces. I feel it's very important to meet people where they are, to understand them. What is the purpose of that for me? The purpose of that for me is to just be a better human being and to contribute to my community. And I gain value in that because it's important to me in terms of my integrity, which someone mentioned in the chat, which I thought was brilliant. So it's just a quick little example. So consider that. And then next week, we are going to be introducing basic concepts of trauma and resilience and why that's important, and kind of the mindfulness continuum, real basic on an elementary level. Again, we're not clinical providers, but we will talk about it and how it impacts our stress response. And then we'll be in our final week 6, which will be sharing your mindfulness plan for those who want to share. And we'll talk about what a mindfulness plan looks like structure-wise, content, with a little bit more handouts and things like that to share that you could take away and use on a day-to-day basis. So, and if this was in person, we'd be giving you journals and all sorts of fun stuff. So I thank you for your time this evening. I really appreciate the time and space that we spend together each Wednesday night. I'm grateful for Krista as my co-facilitator. So have a wonderful evening and have a glorious rest of your week. I know it's going to be a rainy day, but enjoy the next couple days, and we will see you next time. So thanks for stopping by.